Take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
I wanted to talk real quick about something. This is from a few weeks ago now on Piers Morgan's show. I wanted to talk about it at the time, but couldn't quite find the right moment to do so. And it's a little bit offbeat. This isn't the most important thing in the world, but I thought it was a good moment in someone in the sort of grifter universe being forced to kind of confront the flaws in their worldview and their proposed solution to everything with somebody who is, if not an expert, at least a lot closer to expertise than they are. So this is Eric Weinstein, who has a theory called the theory of geometric unity that he presents as a unifying worldview of quantum physics and regular physics, which is something that is elusive in the world of physics, something that tracks both with the current understanding of the physical world and the quantum physical world. That's a tough problem to solve. I'm obviously not a quantum physicist. It gets really complicated, and most of the pop culture understandings of quantum physics and how it works are incorrect and way oversimplified. So to try to simplify the theories is not always that helpful, certainly from somebody who doesn't actually understand the theories or study the theories. So I'm not going to waste your time trying to do that. But Eric Weinstein is essentially, he's not a physicist, he's not a quantum physicist, and he's not an academic. He does in some ways come from that world, but he works more in the financial realm. I think that's where he made some money, is working with different hedge funds or something like that. So he's a mathematics guy. He definitely is educated, but he seems to have created this kind of crackpot worldview and approach to physics, where not only does he have this theory that he wants to present, but he believes that the entire system of physics and established science is essentially designed to keep out new theories and to prevent people from presenting new ideas to the worlds of physics, and essentially to protect the ideology of string theory, which in the mind of Weinstein has kind of taken over the physics world without actually without actually being thoroughly justified all the way through. And so that's kind of the core of this dispute here. And what it really comes down to is that Eric Weinstein's theory does not do any of the work that's necessary in order for it to contend with the leading theories of quantum physics. However, I think the reason that he feels justified in doing that is because in his view, string theory, which is one of the leading theories of quantum physics, also doesn't do that. It also doesn't, and Sean Carroll, the guy that he is debating here, acknowledges this, that the problem with string theory is that it solves a bunch of mathematical and theoretical questions that were trying to be solved by scientists, but it's not something that you can actually prove. So it's not something that is testable in the real world, which means it can't be fully confirmed. But theoretically, it seems to track out, and that's why a lot of quantum physicists run with it. So Eric Weinstein is outraged that his theory does not receive the same amount of charity, despite the fact that his theory does not solve any of the problems or meet any of the marks that a theory like string theory does. So I'll say a little bit more about it than that, but just to get to this clip real quick, won't spend too much time on this, just wanted to address this, and then we will move on to some updates about some of the things that are happening in LA with ICE and the raids and whatnot. But let's play this clip really quick. This is Eric Weinstein on Piers Morgan's program debating Sean Carroll.
I do all sorts of things that you have no idea of, because your attitude, which you repeat in other podcasts, and I highly advise you to spend more time in your physics department and less time on YouTube, is that this is not a serious thing. Nobody's taking it seriously. And your misportrayal of the situation is nearly constant for reasons that completely elude me.
Sean? The good news is I have read Eric's paper. Here it is. I actually have it here, right here. And it's worse than you would think. It just very quickly, it starts off by saying the author is not a physicist and is no longer an active academician, but is an entertainer and host of a podcast. This work of entertainment is a draft work in progress, and it may not be built upon. So we're not allowed to think about Eric's theory and write a follow-up paper about it.
You're very much allowed, Sean.
To everything that is normally done in scientific discourse. You hope that people build upon your theories. You don't try to prevent them. Then later on, it says,
Sean,
this document is an attempt to begin recovering... I'm going to read this. This document is an attempt to begin recovering a rather more complete theory, which at this point is only partially remembered and stitched together from old computer files, notebooks, recordings, and the like, dating back to as far as 1983. And this is why this paper is not going to appear in the peer-reviewed literature. It's not serious. It's a dog ate my homework kind of thing.
First of all, how dare you? Second of all, if you're going to go by the
read your
standards
paper?
of the question is why appear as an entertainer rather than as a physicist. First of all, neither you nor I are trained as physicists, Sean. You're actually trained as an astronomer. What you are doing is creating an environment of fear where every university worries, what does it mean to talk to this person?
Look, I didn't say anything about Eric as a person, his history, or anything like that. I said things about the paper. Everything he says about me is like 90% true, as many things he says. The paper is not giving us any reason to think that this approach is promising. There is no quantum mechanics in the paper. There's no attempt at showing that this solves any of the known problems of quantum gravity. Again, it's not just about Eric, it's about anyone. If you want to make an impact on the physics research community, you have to give them a reason to think that what you do is promising.
Pretty interesting stuff here. Piers Morgan, if his program is good for nothing else, it's good for these type of catty exchanges. He lets people talk. He lets people swipe at each other like this. And so most of the time, I think it's pretty cheap and pretty valueless entertainment. However, this, I think, does have some value. And the reason, actually, I think, is one that Eric Weinstein also has participated in himself. So Eric Weinstein went on the Joe Rogan program to debate Terrence Howard. A while ago, maybe a year and a half ago or something like that, Terrence Howard was going viral because he went on Joe Rogan's podcast and started espousing this new theory of physics and quantum mechanics where he said 1 × 1 = 2. And he essentially had this revolutionary theory of mathematics that he wanted to use. And he was contending essentially the same exact thing that Eric Weinstein is contending here, which is that it's a big club and I ain't in it. And that's the only reason that people aren't taking my ideas seriously. It's not because my ideas aren't serious, and it's not because they're not true. It's because science is all a big lie and it's just a club and they're all just protecting their own whatever profession or prestige. So it's interesting that Eric finds himself in this conversation with Sean Carroll, and in some ways this is a ladder that goes all the way up. I wouldn't accuse Sean Carroll of being like a grifter or anything. I don't know that much about him, but as also gets mentioned in this debate, he's not necessarily a physicist or like an esteemed scientist either. He's just somebody who's in the community, but he's a little bit more close to that legitimacy than Eric Weinstein is. Similarly to how Eric Weinstein is closer to legitimacy than a guy like Terrence Howard. So it's kind of like this step ladder of people who have to engage with guys who are dumber than them in order to fight for their own legitimacy. And so I think Eric Weinstein very effectively did that against Terrence Howard because somebody needed to be able to communicate on Terrence Howard's level that his theories were bullshit and why it's nonsense, why you can't just make up a new way of doing math and say that you have something special. And he essentially is making the same arguments to Terrence Howard that Sean Carroll makes to him here, which is that you can't just, if you have a new theory of the universe and the world, there are certain standards that you have to hit of what you're presenting, both calculation-wise and theoretically, in order for it to be contending with the existing theories that exist. And so Eric Weinstein knows this, and he also knows that his paper does not match up to that. And something really interesting that happens in this debate is at first, Eric Weinstein refers to Sean Carroll as, of course he hasn't read my paper, he doesn't know what he's talking about, blah, blah, blah. Then Sean Carroll goes, actually, I have read his paper, I have it right here. And the first thing he reads, just the intro, says Eric Weinstein is not a physicist, he's an entertainer, he's a host of a podcast, and it essentially is saying that this paper is content, it's entertainment. So that is like so crucial. And you can tell from Eric Weinstein's reaction that he's not expecting Sean Carroll to bring this up. He probably didn't expect Sean Carroll to have even looked at his paper. So that right there completely delegitimizes Eric Weinstein, and he knows it. This whole thing that he's doing, this gambit, depends on that little thing, that piece of this, not getting in the way of people engaging with his paper. And he knows that introducing your theory that way, if you can call it a theory, precludes it from being seriously considered by scientists, physicists. He knows that. So the reason it's out there and the reason that is in it is because he's not really trying to contend with physicists and scientists. What he's trying to do is put out something that can sort of exist in a space that is adjacent to science. And what I think Eric Weinstein's trying to do, based on what I know about him, he kind of came up in the Joe Rogan world. I think he was the one who coined the term intellectual dark web, which is a very try-hard way of saying that a few years back, in maybe 2017, a bunch of right-wingers essentially created a network of podcasts that started to shift the narrative online in a more right-wing direction because they were having very viral and very provocative content and moments on the internet that were drawing a lot of attention. So it was like, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, Ben Shapiro, and Eric and Brett Weinstein were kind of like, most people didn't even know who they were. I assume a decent amount of you guys that I'm talking to right now don't even know who this guy is. He's never been that relevant. However, he does pop up every now and then in this Joe Rogan world. And what I think he's trying to do is he recognizes that with his podcast, Joe Rogan has created an alternative media almost in and of itself. If a person only ever wanted to listen to what Joe Rogan and his guests on his podcast have to say about the world, about health, about medicine, about whatever, they could do that. It is effectively an alternative to mainstream media. And the fact that it's not well informed, the fact that there's no rigor involved, the fact that there's no sense of standards about the information that is being laundered through this program doesn't matter. All that matters is that the audience is there and that Joe Rogan can keep providing content that keeps people sort of orbiting in his world. And so I think Eric Weinstein, in noticing that a core flaw with string theory is that it's not actually provable in the real world. It's not something that you can do experiments on and prove in the traditional scientific sense. And yet it is still an incredibly powerful and influential theory. So I think Eric Weinstein sees that, and he wants to create an alternative theory that does not have to fit in the world of science, but can keep people sort of spinning in his own world. Because within this paper, within this theory, there are all kinds of little problems and puzzles to solve. And string theory essentially works the same way, is my understanding. Again, I'm not an expert, but because string theory is not ultimately applicable, and that is a problem that they're trying to solve, what it does is it keeps a bunch of people working within the world of string theory in quantum physics to try to solve that problem. And I think Eric Weinstein wants to create the same effect in his own world. He wants to have a theory that he kind of controls the terms of, that people have to come to him if they want to participate in. That's what it seems to me like he's doing without being somebody that has a grasp on the physics. And look, I would say that, you guys should watch this debate, But honestly, I don't know how worth it is. I mean, these moments that I showed you are kind of the most concrete because they're the moments where Sean Carroll says very specific things about why Eric Weinstein's theories are not serious. The rest of this debate is kind of just Eric Weinstein throwing a bunch of jargon out there in order to really sound like he knows what he's talking about. It kind of comes off the opposite way. And I think a decent amount of what he's saying is probably true, or he's getting at something, but whatever reaction he's trying to elicit out of Sean Carroll by throwing all this terminology out there, it just kind of doesn't really happen. Sean Carroll doesn't engage him for the most part on the basics of physics, which I'm sure drives Eric Weinstein crazy. But at the end of the day, Eric Weinstein is purposely not presenting himself as a scientist or a physicist. He's presenting himself as an entertainer. So in trying to figure out exactly what his project is, I think that's about as informative as it gets. And he has to play this game of getting really indignant and righteous about the things Sean Carroll said to him because, first of all, I think he had that prepared. And also because that's the only way that he can keep the entertainment value of this going. At the end of the day, this isn't a conversation about physics. It's an entertainment conversation. That's what Eric Weinstein is here to do. So he has to try to preserve his own pseudo credibility while also making things entertaining. And so that's where you get this weird indignance from him and say, well, you've made me do this and now I'm going to talk about you a certain way. It's very childish, but it's very much how an entertainer, not a scientist, would approach this conversation. So I just thought that was interesting, and it got me thinking about what exactly Eric Weinstein's project might be. And if I'm right, and his goal is to just create this kind of self-contained world that can sustain him as a pseudo-academic for the rest of his life, the way we'll know is if we never stop seeing and hearing from Eric Weinstein and he keeps popping up talking about the same theory, and if the theory doesn't change at all. If those two things remain true over the course of a few years or however long, we keep hearing this guy yapping about this theory and nothing changes about it, and there's no development in terms of what this theory means, what it applies to, etc., and he just keeps whinging about how they won't let him in the door of the physics world, that's how we'll know that all he's trying to do is create an alternate network that he can thrive in for the rest of his life, regardless of if it's based on any truth or not. So real quick, just a couple updates on the situation in LA. There's still some ongoing raids going on. Here is some footage from some of the raids that they were doing in Hollywood. This kid, Adrian, who got kidnapped by, I believe it was ICE or Border Patrol out front of a Walmart. It has still not been released. They are now saying that he punched a federal agent in the face. That's not visible in any of the footage anywhere, but they're saying that's why he took him. That's why they took him. I believe they're holding him in the federal detention center in downtown LA, but that's all we know about it currently. Like I said, there are more raids going on in LA. Donald Trump has ordered for them to ramp up the raids as a response to the fact that there's pushback against it. However, we know that, first of all, there are not as many of these people who are like criminal migrants as they claimed. So most of these people that they're going after are innocent. But also, they seem to be avoiding areas where there's a lot of active crime and danger. So instead, they're going for safe areas and places where people are just going to work and arresting them instead. So it's a direct contradiction of the promise that Donald Trump made to all the American people, which was that this was about making the streets safer and getting people off the streets who are a threat to you. That's not what Donald Trump is doing here. And in fact, it seems that their agents are actively avoiding that in favor of going after people who are just getting up and going to work every day like the rest of us. And so the last thing is that ICE and I believe Border Patrol showed up at Dodger Stadium yesterday, which caused a big kerfuffle. Essentially, they were spotted there. A bunch of protesters showed up. In response, LAPD came and essentially shut off the entrance to Dodger Stadium to allow ICE to escape the other way, and then LAPD did the same. So ICE was effectively chased out of Dodger Stadium by people showing up. The Dodgers made some statement after saying we have told ICE to leave. That was only because protesters showed up. That was only because protesters showed up, and that threatened not only to cause a disruption, but to become a bigger disruption. So this seems to be one of the more effective tactics that's happening. Although the big protests are good and big protest movements are good, being able to flexibly and quickly react when ICE or the feds are spotted in a certain community area, show up there and cause a disruption in real time, that seems to be the best way to interrupt their operations, because as much as they're able to move around in an opaque way, once they're out in the open and people notice them, if we are able to respond quickly and show up and threaten them essentially with being seen by massive amounts of people, that gets in the way of their operation. It also makes things uncomfortable for them. So just another example of a protest tactic that seems to be working, and this seems to be the favored method over, big protest confrontations with the police in downtown or whatever, or in one concentrated area, because that's not how the feds are operating. They're not concentrating in one area. They're doing these raids in various places throughout the city. And so that is where we need to try to interrupt. And lastly here, just to show you guys, it looks like this is a protest outside of one of the places where ICE is said to be sleeping. They're staying at hotels and various things like that in the area. And another effective tactic that people have been doing is showing up and making as much noise outside of these hotels as possible to make it hard for them to sleep, but also make it so that the hotel staff hopefully asks them to leave. So these are the kind of things that communities are doing in response to these ICE raids. It needs to continue. There is a possibility that more unrest is sparked out of these type of actions. But that's a good thing, because the more that happens, the more attention is put on this issue, and the less we move on to some other moving target that the administration wants us to talk about. And yes, Iran is important, and other infringements on people's rights are important, but I believe that these immigration raids are the most heinous thing that is happening in America at the moment, and we need to keep the conversation here, because if we're talking about authoritarian creep and consolidation of the state against the rights of the individual, this is the center of the conflict right here. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting different kinds of stuff there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main channel, book reviews, movie reviews. I'm reading Catcher in the Rye right now. I'm probably going to review that on there. Also posting music early. I've got a couple EPs out that were available first for members only. Right now, there's a couple tracks on there. There's a freestyle by me and my buddies Wrecked and Psych. So if you want access to all that, different podcasts and other stuff, become a member. And if there's other kinds of content that you'd like to see for members only stuff, then let me know and we'll work some things out.